Yeah, my name is Marco Minghini. I work at the JRC, the Joint Research Center. For those of you who don't know, the Joint Research Center is the scientific arm of the European Commission. On behalf of my colleagues, also, I'm happy to give this talk on monitoring the fairness of the geospatial data with lessons learned from the European Union. So let me just first introduce what is the context of the work. Well, we know, of course, that the landscape of sharing geospatial data has changed a lot over the last few years and decades. We have a lot of new terms like data spaces or geospatial ecosystems or even SDIs 2.0, whatever you want to call this. Clearly, we have a lot of new elements now in this picture. We have new big data sources from research, Earth observation, IoT, crowdsourcing, AI-generated data. We have technology and infrastructures to process, to store, to encode those data. We have new actors, especially the private sector has become a very important actor, but citizens as well, researchers, of course. We have new legislation to open the data or to improve sharing the data, to protect the privacy, and so on. And we have business models to organize and to govern all of that. However, even if we live in a hyper-connected world where more and more data is generated, sometimes it's still difficult to access and to find and to use geospatial data due to a set of issues of technical nature, legal nature, and governance or organizational nature. So to improve data sharing, as you might know, the FAIR principles have been introduced. The FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. The principles were first introduced in a seminal paper from 2016 in Nature Scientific Data, and today they have become really mainstream everywhere, not just in the geospatial domain. The OGC, just to give an example, has introduced the FAIR principles. Okay, doesn't work. In its mission, Horizon Europe, which I think you are all well familiar with, Horizon Europe is the EU Research and Innovation Program, also has an open access and open data policy, according to which all the data produced by the project have to be made available as fair. And even organizations producing the data, for example, ourselves, the JRC, but of course this is valid in general, have come up with guidelines for fair data sharing. Now, let's focus here on the public sector. I said private sector is important, but let's focus here on the public sector, which is still a key player in the geospatial data sharing context, because they always have to ensure quality certified, trustworthy, authoritative, official data, fostering transparency, accountability, and of course, powering policy and decision making. So fairness is crucial, of course, for the public sector, and there are a lot of initiatives also at different levels to measure the fairness. How to measure? Well, usually through KPIs or indicators. If you check prominent initiatives around the world, for example, in Canada, in the US, and of course in the EU, you will see different metrics, ways, approaches to measure the fairness of the data. The focus of this talk is exactly on the EU, but on the EU as a way to gather experience. So as you will see in the following, with the team I'm part of, we acquired hands-on experience in monitoring the fairness of the EU public sector-driven geospatial data infrastructure. And the idea is to share this. So I will talk about the legislation to give you some context, what are the KPIs, how these are calculated, and then I will try to distill some lessons, so some learning, some recommendations that can be relevant for other initiatives. So that's a bit the idea. Now, legally speaking, the starting point is the INSPIRE directive. I think you are all very much familiar because it's quite an old directive from 2007, but a very important directive because it was introduced exactly because there was no fairness at all in terms of data sharing, geospatial data sharing in the EU. So this is the public sector geospatial data infrastructure. Everything started from legal requirements on making data discoverable through metadata, accessible through network services, and interoperable through ad hoc data models. From the legal framework, then a very strong and solid organizational framework and technical framework have followed. And today, we can say that Inspire is the largest geospatial data sharing effort ever undertaken. For sure, it's a reference still today for similar initiatives, even beyond Europe. Just to give you some updates, there has been an evaluation in 2022 that basically set the basis for a potential revision of the directive. So we might expect a revision happening at some point soon. We are at FOSS4GE, so let me quickly go through the software. So we have an Inspire infrastructure that we operate and we maintain and that the member states use on a daily basis. We have the geoportal. You might have actually come across the geoportal to find data, to look for data. So this is where actually we provide access to the data shared by the member states. We have a validator in the middle to validate the conformance of data, of metadata and services to the specifications. And we have an Inspire registry that exposes all the Inspire identifiers, code list, vocabularies, etc. And of course, we are at FOSS4GE, so happy to once again remind that everything is based on open source building blocks. So GeoNetwork for the geoportal, the ETF for the validator, and the registry software for the Inspire registry. Now, let's move to monitoring. First of all, why monitoring? Well, this is because monitoring is at the very core of EU legislation in general. It's a way, of course, for the Commission to certify the compliance from member states to legislation, and it provides the basis for potential penalties or infringements to be given to member states. But on the other hand, it's an opportunity for member states to actually coordinate and to strengthen the cooperation between the national authorities and to foster also accountability, transparency, etc. In Inspire, we have monitoring rules and indicators defined 6 years ago in a Commission decision from 2019 that define 19 indicators or KPIs. So KPIs is key performance indicators, of course. So I will just say indicators in the following. Here you have the 5 categories of indicators, not the exact list of indicators, but you can see very clearly that these somehow measure the fairness of the infrastructure because there's the availability of data and services, the conformity of metadata, the conformity of spatial datasets, the accessibility of spatial datasets, and the conformity of network services. How do we calculate them? In a nutshell, using the infrastructure that I've just shown, all based on open source, so robust, reproducible, objective, and so on. Now, the second piece of the puzzle is the Open Data Directive. This is much more recent, and it's not a geospatial directive in itself. It's a directive on data, and open data in particular. This was followed by an implementing act in 2023, where basically the concept of high-value datasets was defined. This is a very important concept. The idea of high-value datasets is datasets, the reuse of which holds the potential to generate important benefits to the EU economy and society. So the idea is that those datasets, given this potential, shall be made available again by public sector organizations for free under open access licenses in machine-readable formats via APIs and, when relevant, depending on the dataset, as a bulk download. So the directive defines only the categories of datasets, and then the implementing act came and defined the actual list of datasets. 3 out of the 6 categories include geospatial datasets. Geospatial, Earth observation and environment, and mobility. These were the names that were given to the categories. And there are all the requirements on the license, on the key attributes, the formats, metadata, granularity, etc. The Open Data Directive does not have a monitoring process with indicators, but just a reporting process, meaning that member states have to report every 2 years with the very first, so the first ever reporting happened in February this year. Well, you can see, oh, now it works. You can see that basically, even if it's just a reporting, what they have to report about is basically, again, about fairness, because they have to list the data sets, they have to provide the online reference to the metadata, the persistent link to the license, to the APIs, and so on and so forth. So it's still really focused on fairness of implementation. Now, what did we learn from all this experience? First, we have 6 years of data, of results for Inspire, I mentioned, because 6 years ago, we have this new decision. We calculate indicators every year. We can see some trends. And the trend, even if I'm not showing really all the values, says that there has been a slow but continuous improvement. The process has become well established. It was new at the beginning. it's very much well established now, which means that member states have a lot of clarity on the timeline, on the roles, the responsibilities, on the tools used, on the timeline, and so on and so forth. Vice versa, for the Open Data Directive, the situation is a bit heterogeneous. We just have one reporting round where the situation was, of course, let's say, not optimal in the sense that not all member states submitted a report. Some, well, those that submitted the report may not have reported about all the data sets. The way to tag the data sets was not, let's say, harmonized between member states because it was the beginning. There are the usual issues of legal, organizational, or technical nature, and there was actually in February still a partial availability of shared guidelines, like on how to tag the high-value data sets. Shared. So it's a work in progress. And the main message here for those types of initiatives is that whenever you have initiatives, especially when public sector is involved, and we know that public sector is not the quickest to absorb changes, it takes time. So be patient. It takes time, but you will see improvements. Now, even more interestingly here, the very moment when you decide how to monitor the implementation of an initiative, you are already somehow deciding the way, the direction it will go. In this case, we have indicators, I told you. Let's take an example. Indicator on the conformity of metadata. So this is an indicator calculated as the fraction of conformant metadata divided by the total number of metadata. So it's a ratio from 0 to 100%, right? As an implementer, you of course want to maximize the value of the indicator, obvious. How do you maximize the value of the indicator? You have two ways, basically. The most obvious is you try to make all your metadata conformant, but the other way is you try to decrease the denominator. So you try to get rid of some metadata so that the ratio, is good. This is unfortunately what happened in some cases. It was, of course, a counter effect we didn't imagine, but it happened. So can we really trust 100% the fairness or what we measure through the indicators? I would say no. I prove that with a very simple example. Something else, the KPIs we have do not really measure the quality of the data in the sense that, the quality is declared in the metadata, of course. You have the lineage, you have information on everything, but there are no topology checks, there are no quality checks on spatial accuracy, completeness, etc. So there are many things that the indicators do not tell, but what is even more important is this. So the indicators are totally provider-centric, and this is, again, what happens everywhere. Provider-centric meaning they just talk about the offer from the data providers, but they don't tell anything about the actual use or the actual value that they generate for the users. How much do data sets respond to the user needs or the use cases, etc.? We don't know, but that would be extremely interesting to know. How to do that? Well, maybe we should try, depending on the case, to focus on and to be happy with partial levels of fairness, or even to incorporate the care principles. For those of you who are familiar, the care principles were introduced in response of the FAIR principles, and they are more people-oriented and purpose-oriented. They were defined by indigenous data communities. And they really focus on the benefit, on the responsibility, on ethical principles. So they complement very well the FAIR principles. Something else, in Inspire, the way some indicators were calculated was based on self-declarations made by data providers in the metadata. But when we actually went and actually checked whether these were self-declarations on conformity, like conformity of data sets, we found out that in most of the cases, this information, the self-declaration of conformity was unreliable. So a big lesson learned is avoid self-declarations when having to calculate indicators, because it doesn't work. Also, I mentioned before, in Inspire, monitoring happens once a year, in particular on 15th of December. It means that after the 15th, we start harvesting the catalogs, and based on the metadata, we calculate the indicators. The counter effect of that is that, unfortunately, we see a lot of work, a lot of preparation in the last month or last weeks before the 15th of December, while we would, of course, like to see the same, let's say, care paid continuously. So Can we move from discrete to continuous monitoring? Of course, this is also encoded in legislation, so we have to do that on the 15th of December. But this is really, again, something that happened as an effect. More towards good news here. We were able, thanks to a governance process that we included in the Inspire and with the Inspire community, to accommodate the changes. Inspire is a directive from 2007. Of course, the technological landscape at that time was completely different. Several things have happened, just some of the most recent new encodings for the data. So can I use GeoPackage in Inspire? Can I use GeoJSON? Yes, now you can. But because we have had a process where we demonstrated that they are valid encodings, valid meaning they can be used, they do not break any legal requirements in Inspire. Similarly, OGC API features. So try always to design an approach that can accommodate novelties. And finally, on the more, let's say, software-related component, the whole process is automated and is based on open source software, as I mentioned before. First, open source software, we know very well, ensures really objectivity, transparency, reproducibility of results. It's very, very important in a process like this. It's not just about the software, actually, because it's about providing clear documentation for the tools, release plans that allow providers to really and well understand, for example, when the version used for the monitoring will be released, what will be the news, how much time before the deadline, and so on and so forth. And also the use of the validator as a tool providing legal certainty. So an open by design technical approach is absolutely crucial for that because it will be accepted by the community. About community, monitoring is a technical process, of course, you understood that, but be ensured that without establishing a dialogue, a trust relationship with the relevant community, it will not be successful. And this takes time. Cannot happen overnight, cannot happen in 1 year. That's why also we are very, let's say, we trust that the Open Data Directive will actually fly somehow as Inspire did in terms of monitoring. This, of course, entails a lot of work to establish the the right governance structures, to really help member states also with the KPIs to provide scientifically sound guidance, to sit down with them, to interpret the results, look at the errors, look at how they can improve, etc. It's a virtuous cycle. If the community feels engaged, they will contribute back. Our help desks for the Inspire tools are very much used by the community, so they really use the tools, they report bugs, they offer help, etc., etc., etc. So the lesson learned here is a sentence I like a lot, that a technical infrastructure is only as good as the social infrastructure underpinning it. This could be sort of a summary of the FOSS4GE community as well here, because it's not just a technical community, I think. Now, moving to the conclusions. So again, the work was about analyzing the processes for monitoring the fairness of public sector-driven geospatial data infrastructures. The EU was just an excuse somehow. I mean, I didn't discuss a lot or almost at all about the results, but I used that as really hands-on experience to derive learnings. And again, I believe we are in a very good position as, let's say, as the team that has operated the monitoring of such a big initiative like Inspire for years. These learnings, I think, are quite relevant for similar initiatives, but even non-geospatial, because I really didn't discuss too much about geospatial stuff, but also even beyond Europe and or even beyond the continental level. Anything, I think, I hope at least this is useful to others. Main message is don't just stop at the fair level. It's a means to an end. It's not the end, it's not the final goal, but try always to address the user demands. Try to measure what actually generates value, which is, of course, a big question mark. And here we ask the help of the community. So how to choose KPIs that can actually go beyond just measuring the fairness and that can capture the usage, the benefit, the value derived for users. Final point is, well, we have the technology available to actually move the monitoring from, let's say, one-time process to a continuous process. Let's use it. So let's come up with robust approaches that can actually ensure that. If you want to know more, there's the paper. Of course, each talk of the academic track has a paper associated, so you can read more. If you are instead interested more into the actual geospatial data infrastructure, so more details really on the results, on the availability, past, present, and future, I will give a talk tomorrow on early insights from the Open Data Directive, again, based on Inspire and the journey from Inspire to the Open Data Directive. References, and that's it. Thank you.